What up, everybody? Sven Diesel here. Going to be tying up a feather Gamechanger. I'm using GSP in black. I got a Gamakatsu B10s here and a size 6. Let's start our thread, clip out our tag end, and get started on this adventure. For the tail, I'm using a product by Fly Skins, Thin Fins. I've actually painted these in advance with markers just because I put some flash on, and I found that if I'm coloring it with the flash, sometimes the flash gets markered on it. But I want to make sure. Got about 1.5 inches past the end of the hook. I'll secure it on with a couple loose wraps, 3, 4, 5, and then making sure that it doesn't walk over the shank. And I've been folding it back over itself just because it makes me think it's more secure on there. And now I'm going to be using some tighter wraps to secure that in. And later this will be, super glued with some Z cement. But for now, let's just tie it in, get some real tight wraps over this as kind of create it, make it a little bit more uniform on this shank. But I really like these tails and what they've been doing and the ability you have to color them to match your fish or whatever you're trying to mimic. But let's go ahead and tie in some flash. I'm folding it just in half, securing it on the top of the shank, and as I wrap backwards, I want to secure it and kind of have it go equally on each side, but not super important. I'm not counting the amount, the different strands of flash I have on each side. I just want to make sure there's a good chunk of something shimmery coming out the back of this Gamechanger, and I like to kind of trim them at a 45-degree angle so that they come almost to the point of the oh crap, those are too short. Let's add a little bit more. Can't ever go wrong with too much flash on there, but I'll add a little bit more doing the same technique, securing it on the top, dividing them down the sides. But this time I'll make sure to let them be a little bit longer, almost coming to the middle of the rear fin. And now comes time for the body. I'm using American Hackle by Whiting. This is brown. For the rear section, I'm going to be using these feathers up at the top and working my way towards the middle, longer fiber sections for the middle and the front. But I'll show you. Basically, take a feather and preen those, crease these feathers back so you can see how long the fibers are. Strip off the fluff. I've on the rear section, I don't use much fluff, but in the middle and the front, I've been using more fluff, so that's like 1, maybe 2 wraps of fluff. But let's tie that in by the tip and make sure it's nice and secure. And then let's go ahead and wrap it around. You're gonna get straggle fibers. I don't spend a lot of time on making sure all the fibers are going back, and you'll see why in a second. I actually will, after tying it off with a couple, wraps here, we're going to go ahead and snip out the stem and basically preen these fibers back. And so there's a natural, well, not natural because I'm making them taper back, but it really gives the shape to this rear section. And you notice I'm going to secure it now with the Z cement so that the feather, the flash, and the tail is all bonded with this GSP to the shank. And let's continue to wrap more feathers in. I'll be using about 4 or 5 for this rear section. And I'm going to go ahead and speed up the film now so that you don't have to sit and watch all this fun goodness of wrapping. But look at how those fibers just kind of go everywhere. When you use the cement, you want to make sure it dries before you start wrapping these. Otherwise, you'll get cement on those feathers. And a key when I am preening these feathers back, and you'll notice this here in the next 2 feathers, I really try and keep the fibers that are on the top half of the shank. I try to wrap them back so they're on the top, and then the bottom half of the fibers I try, and when I'm tying them in, making sure they're on the bottom half, and that way it gives a thinner profile to this, similar to a fish body. But you can go as tight on these wraps as you want. You can spend, countless, lots of time making sure that it's, super clean touching wraps, but I don't really, it's not that I don't care, but I don't waste my time because it still looks really good and has good movement. And one of the most important things is as you get up close to the eye, you got to not to start thinking about spacing, but making sure that it's full, because we're going to have a gap between the articulation shank and this rear hook. And so I really want it to look pretty and make sure that nothing's going to be in the way. And so here I go with my last feather for this. I got a 3/16 of an inch, and I'm really working on making sure these fibers are going backwards. And as I get closer towards the end where I normally would leave a gap to tie in, I keep tying in. You see there's a little bit of fluff going in right now because the fluff is going to cause more movement than these stiff fibers. But as I secure that last wrap, I'm going to snip out the stem, and I'm going to give it a good double whip finish. And, just look at that profile. I really like that. And I got a couple strays. Let's just pull those out. But let's double whip finish it. And then I will use a little bit of loon flow to kind of just hold that in place. Now, as I grab the top half of these fibers, I'm going to kind of make sure they're sticking up where I want them, because that loon is going to form into those fibers as I cure it now, and see how they just stick up just how I wanted them. And I'll do the same with the bottom section. Drop a loon, hold the fibers kind of sticking up a little bit more, cure it, and we've got a rear section that is done. Now, if you got a material clip like a hair clip or something, you can hold this so that this rear hook doesn't get into you. But these articulation shanks by Fish Skull, this is a 20 millimeter. So I'm going to go ahead and get this hook. I'm mainly concerned about the rear hook not going into my finger. And so I'm going to put it on my magnet with a holder. And let's go ahead and start our thread. This middle section is going to be done the same way. We're going to be tying in some flash on the rear section, kind of trying to make sure it fans out about halfway down this rear section. But I have been trying something new. I've been putting a little bit of lead, 0.015, just a little bit on in the middle section to even out the shank, so that I don't have to use a ton of thread. Or, I mean, you're not going to see the tapering here, but I just like a little bit of weight here. I've noticed it adds a little bit of movement, and as you notice, I'm not going over these lead wraps initially straight up and down. I go to 45 so that I can get a better coating on it. And at this point, I'm going to tie in a little bit more flash because I love tons of it. And same process as the rear, keeping it on the top. This stuff's getting everywhere on me. I guess I should have grabbed these a little bit better instead of, yeah, okay, there we go. And I'm going to go ahead and clip those so that they're about halfway down this rear section of the last section, and go ahead and clip the other side as well. And at this point, I'll go ahead and work my thread up just a little bit, get ready to tie in. But let's throw down a little bit of cement first, just to hold those lead on, hold the shank together, and just really secure that. And while it's still wet, I'm going to go ahead and tie in my first tip of my next feather in line. And I always line up my feathers according to how I'm going to put them on, so that way there is a good taper. So I prep all my feathers before. So let's skip this section. Do it just the same as the rear. use about, I'd say a total of 4 feathers on this middle section, maybe 3, depending on how tight you do it. But just wrap them, and then, you know, secure the feather with a couple wraps, preen them back, and then, you know, work your way up towards the eye again. And so let's go ahead and skip forward on the video at this point to save some time. There we go, it's done. I'm going to go ahead and move my material clip back, put in my front hook, which is a number 1 Gamakatsu B10s, and let's start our thread and work our way back, doing the same process we did with the rear. Although this time we've got to secure that middle section from the articulation shank. We're going to be using some nylon coated wire. I'm going to go ahead and start that so that there's a tag end off the front, because I am OCD and always try to, I don't know, I guess I try and build these too strong, but I'm going to go ahead and wrap it back over itself, not trying to start at the very tip, but, you know, secure it a little bit with a little loop on the end, and I'll tighten that down later. But let's snip off this tag end using some flush cutters. And I'm going to really kind of crank down on this now, making sure it's nice and secure, working my, I guess I got a little bit of that thread with the flush cutters, but that shouldn't matter because we're going to be covering this in cement or Z-ment. And so let's work our way through the eye of the hook, making sure to go down through the eye so that the hooks match up. And I'm going to loosely, you know, secure this on the bottom of the hook so that it's flowing. We can adjust the gap distance here in a second, but I'll put about 4 or 5 wraps, and then you can kind of shimmy where you want it, place it, and then really start cranking down on that and work my way back so that it's got, I like to leave a little bit of gap as it's starting to go over the bend, so that, but everybody has their own style. Now for this, I'm going to weight it with a 1/8 ounce bead. So I'm going to go ahead and first, you want to see where the bead's going to go. It's going to sit right behind this head I'm going to put on. And so now that I know where the spacing is for this bead, I'm using a tungsten bead, 1/8 ounce. That way it's got a good weight distribution. I'm going to set this on the bottom of the shank and start to secure it in by wrapping on the rear side, and that's right where I want it. And so then I'm going to wrap in front of it, and you'll see how it just kind of sets it right there on the bottom. And I'm just going to maybe double check the head to make sure that's where I want it. Yep, perfect. So that it butts right up against it. And so I'm going to really kind of start cranking down on that. It's going to move around for now. We'll use a little bit of cement here in a minute to just hold it, make sure it holds on the bottom, but wrap that tag end back over the top. Start cranking down. I'll have to build it's not wanting to really bend over, so I'll have to build up a little bit of a taper here. The cement will also help with that, but I'll go ahead and somewhat figure eight that, work my way back, snip out that extra end, and now we have a secured body. But let's throw a little cement on. I'll probably do 2 coats on this, but I'll start with this first one, and then I'll go ahead and do a bunch of wraps over it just to make sure that bead doesn't want to move around. And I'll really just, I'm almost figure eighting this like you do some barbells to make sure there's one, so that when I'm wrapping feathers up this, it's easy to go around that bead, and 2, just to, you know, hold it in place, making sure it stays right on the bottom of that shank. And I'll, you know, put a little bit more cement now that I've got a good thread base and it's right where I want it, and let that dry up. Now let's add in some flash of the copper again, and we'll, you know, basically I want that flash to be about the same, go to the midsection of the middle section. And so I'll put it on the top, making sure to divide it on each side. And I've got probably 5-6 strands here, and just making sure it's going on each side. And I'll snip them so that they're, I don't know, these are about 1 inch. And they're going back just to add a little bit in the body. But let's go ahead and get started. Now I'll just move right along my line of feathers. I'll go to my next largest feather in line, and we'll go ahead and tie it in by the tip, and keep going with some more wraps. And I'll use about between 4. Yeah, I usually use about 4 on this front section. And we'll go ahead and start wrapping this. And like the previous sections, you'll get some stragglers kind of going everywhere. It's not too important because I'm going to be, doing some wraps so that these kind of fold back and matching that profile. And man, these soft feathers really kind of got everywhere. But it will all look good in a minute. So I'll secure those, work my way, just kind of folding the top half of the section, making sure it's on top, and the bottom section on bottom. As I get to about the middle of this, it looks like I got room for about maybe 2 more after this, maybe 1 more. I'll have to put the head on to see, but it's very, to get the right profile, my longest fiber feather is the second to last. So that was a pretty long feather. I may step down. Yep, so I got room for 1 more. And so I'm going to tie in, instead of going with a bigger feather length in fibers, I'm going to step it down a little bit and go with a narrower or a shorter one, just barely. So I actually cleaned up a couple extra feathers here than I needed to. But as I'm going to make sure it's nice and tight behind, and I only want about 3-4 in front of that bead, because if I've experienced, if I do too many, that it actually interferes with the head going on properly. And I don't really like shoving those heads on super hard. Just because I'm going to fill the gap with some glue. But let's go ahead and clean up that nose. But before that, I'll add a little bit more hackle or flash. And here I'm adding a big chunk. I got probably 8, maybe 10. And I really like a lot here in the front. Make sure it looks nice and pretty. They're fanned out kind of evenly on the side. We'll clean up the front section of this hook and go ahead and whip finish it off. And I don't really need to do 2 or 3, and I don't need to glue it because we're going to be using a product called E6000. But before I put the glue on, let's make sure the head looks good where it's at. I got plenty of room for the eye, and I got a straight fiber. I'll snip that out. But here's a little small tube. I just like to push a little glob on the top, a nice little bead, and it will stay in place, and then I put one on the bottom. And this stuff's really awesome. It takes a little bit to dry, let them cure overnight, but it holds really well and gives me a minute to play with it and get it where I like it. So I'll go ahead and just slip that back on, give it a little push, making sure it's even top to bottom, good profile, making sure all those fibers are where I want it. And you can see that narrow profile. It just really helps when you're doing back wraps. But there you go. That is the Gamechanger in a feather. It's short. It's about 2 1/4, 2.5 inches. And it just has tons of movement. Just jiggle. So good luck. Have fun.